The call came at 3 a.m. Trump's legal team scrambling in the darkness, phones lighting up across 3 time zones. And suddenly every lawyer who thought this case was manageable realized they were wrong. The Supreme Court just issued an emergency order that could dismantle a billion-dollar empire overnight, not next month, not after more appeals, right now. And the reaction inside Trump Tower? Pure panic. Wait, let me back up because this didn't come out of nowhere, even though it feels that way. This all connects to something most people thought was resolved months ago, the New York civil fraud case. You know, the one where Attorney General Letitia James accused Trump of inflating his asset values to secure better loans, better interest rates, and financial advantages he wouldn't have gotten if the numbers were honest. The judge ruled against Trump, hard. The penalty, $364 million, business restrictions, bans on borrowing from New York banks. The kind of judgment that cuts at the core of how Trump operates financially. Trump appealed, and for a moment it looked like he caught a break. The appeals court reduced the penalty. His team celebrated. Media called it a victory. But here's what got lost in the headlines. The fraud findings weren't overturned. Not even close. The court said, yes, fraud happened. We're just recalculating the damages. So the liability stayed. The judgment stayed. And while Trump fought, delayed, and appealed, interest kept piling up. Day after day, the bill got bigger. And now the Supreme Court has entered the picture in a way nobody saw coming. According to multiple sources close to the proceedings, the court issued an emergency stay that effectively freezes Trump's ability to move, sell, or transfer major assets until the full appeal process concludes. This isn't a symbolic ruling. This is the judicial system saying, stop. We need to make sure these assets stay put while we figure this out. The order covers properties across the Trump Organization portfolio. We're talking about Trump Tower in Manhattan, golf courses in Scotland and New Jersey, luxury hotels, Mar-a-Lago in Florida, and commercial holdings that have been the backbone of Trump's public brand for decades. Here's where things get intense. The freeze doesn't just limit Trump's business flexibility. It sends a message to lenders, investors, and partners that the empire they thought was untouchable might actually be vulnerable. And in the world of high-stakes real estate and finance, perception is everything. If major stakeholders believe Trump's assets are at risk of seizure, they pull back. Loans get harder to secure. Partnerships dissolve. Credit lines tighten. The financial ecosystem that kept the Trump Organization running starts to crack. Let's talk about what an asset freeze actually means in practical terms, because most people hear frozen assets and think it's just paperwork. It's not. When a court freezes assets, it means Trump can't sell properties to raise cash. He can't borrow against them. He can't transfer ownership to shell companies or family members. He can't restructure debt in ways that might protect his wealth from enforcement. Every major financial move requires court approval first. And here's the kicker. This freeze is happening while Trump still owes $364 million, plus accruing interest. The longer this drags out, the higher that number climbs. Interest doesn't stop just because assets are frozen. It compounds. Every day adds thousands of dollars to the total. So now you've got a situation where Trump is sitting on billions in real estate value but can't access it, can't liquidate it, and can't use it to pay off the judgment that's growing larger by the week. In my view, this is what people mean when they say the walls are closing in. It's not just legal pressure, it's financial suffocation. Here's the part most people overlook. Trump's wealth has always been about leverage. He doesn't keep massive cash reserves sitting around. His fortune is tied up in properties, developments, and brand licensing deals. The value exists on paper, but turning that into liquid cash fast, that's a different story. And real estate isn't like stocks. You can't just click sell and walk away with money the next day. Properties take months to sell. especially high-value commercial assets in complicated markets. Buyers need financing, legal teams need to review titles, regulatory approvals have to clear. But Trump doesn't have months. He has a court order demanding payment now. This isn't just about money, it's about identity. Trump built his entire public image on being a billionaire businessman who wins. The towers with his name in gold letters, the private jets, the luxury properties. The message was always the same. Trump is rich, Trump is successful, Trump is untouchable. But this Supreme Court freeze puts that image under threat in a way lawsuits and indictments never could, because losing in court can be spun as political persecution. Losing your financial empire, that's harder to explain away, and here's where the political dimension gets fascinating. Trump is still a dominant force in Republican politics. He's endorsed candidates. He's shaped party strategy. He's been the center of nearly every major political conversation since 2016. But donors don't just care about loyalty. They care about viability. A candidate whose financial empire is collapsing, whose assets are frozen, whose business operations are under judicial control, that creates risk. And risk makes money nervous. If major Republican donors start to believe that Trump's legal and financial problems are spiraling out of control, that he's becoming a liability rather than an asset, the calculus changes. Campaign contributions dry up. Endorsements get quietly withdrawn. Political allies start looking toward other candidates who don't carry the same baggage. Trump's critics see this moment as long-delayed accountability. His supporters see it as yet another example of the system targeting him unfairly. But here's the truth that cuts through both narratives. This isn't political theater. This is a Supreme Court order backed by legal precedent, fraud findings upheld on appeal, and enforcement mechanisms that don't care about public opinion. So what happens if Trump can't come up with the money? That's the question everyone's asking, and the answer is brutal. Asset seizures, property sales, forced liquidation. If the court determines that Trump is unable or unwilling to satisfy the judgment, enforcement officers can step in. They can seize properties. They can auction assets. They can take control of revenue streams and redirect them toward paying down the debt. And this isn't theoretical. Civil judgments get enforced this way all the time when defendants don't comply. The difference is that most defendants aren't former presidents with properties that carry symbolic weight. Imagine federal marshals showing up at Trump Tower. Imagine Mar-a-Lago, the place Trump calls his winter White House, being put up for auction to satisfy a court judgment. The political and media fallout would be seismic. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Some of Trump's properties are entangled in other legal disputes. Some are used as collateral for existing loans. Some have complex ownership structures involving family members and business partners. Untangling all of that to determine what can legally be seized and sold, that's a legal nightmare that could take years. And the longer it takes, the more interest accrues, the bigger the judgment grows, and the deeper the financial hole becomes. From what I've seen in expert analysis, Trump's best-case scenario at this point is negotiating a payment plan that the court will actually accept. But that requires admitting he doesn't have the liquidity to pay the full amount up front. And for someone whose brand is built on projecting unlimited wealth, that admission carries its own cost. Here's something most people never think about. Behind all the legal filings and financial documents, there are real human decisions happening right now. Employees at the Trump Organization wondering if their jobs are secure. Business partners trying to figure out whether their deals will survive. Family members watching the empire their father and grandfather built come under threat. Legal teams working around the clock, not just to fight the judgment, but to figure out how to keep the business operational while major assets are frozen. Accountants scrambling to restructure finances. Public relations strategists trying to control the narrative. and Trump himself, watching properties he spent decades building, branding, and defending, face potential seizure by the very legal system he spent years criticizing. This is the part where ideology and politics fade into the background, and the raw reality of accountability sets in. Courts don't negotiate based on who you are or what your supporters believe. They operate on precedent, procedure, and enforcement power. And right now, that power is being directed at the financial foundation of Trump's public identity. In my opinion, this is one of those moments where history is being written in real time. Not with dramatic speeches or campaign rallies, but with court orders, asset freezes, and legal mechanisms designed to ensure no one, regardless of wealth or status, sits above the law. So where does this go from here? Trump's legal team will fight the freeze. They'll argue it's excessive, that it prevents him from conducting legitimate business, that it causes irreparable harm. They'll file motions, they'll appeal to higher courts, they'll use every legal tool available. But the Supreme Court doesn't issue emergency orders lightly. For them to step in at this level means they believe there's a significant risk that assets could disappear, be transferred, or be restructured in ways that make enforcement impossible later. The timeline matters too. If this drags out through the election cycle, Trump's financial vulnerability becomes a campaign issue. Opponents will use it, media will cover it, voters will judge it, and if the freeze stays in place long enough, the compounding interest could push the judgment well beyond $400 million, potentially even higher. At that point, even selling major properties might not be enough to satisfy the debt. The other wild card? Public reaction. Trump's base has stood by him through indictments, impeachments, and criminal charges. But financial collapse hits differently than legal battles. It challenges the core narrative that Trump is a master businessman who always wins. If supporters start to see Trump as financially vulnerable, as someone whose empire is genuinely at risk, that could shift political calculations in ways polls can't predict. The bottom line is this. The Supreme Court has frozen major Trump Organization assets while a $364 million civil fraud judgment remains unpaid. The freeze limits Trump's ability to move, sell, or leverage those properties. Interest continues to compound. Enforcement mechanisms are in place. And the financial empire Trump built over decades is now under judicial control. This isn't just another lawsuit. This isn't just another headline. This is a defining moment where wealth, power, and accountability collide under the scrutiny of the highest court in the land. What happens next doesn't just affect Trump. It affects how future presidents, business leaders, and public figures understand the limits of legal protection when courts issue final judgments. The stakes are enormous, the pressure is relentless, and the clock is ticking. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit subscribe. We're covering every major development in this story as it unfolds. No spin, no exaggeration, just the facts, the analysis, and the implications you need to understand what's really happening. I appreciate you.